stuff as well, which is fantastic. So there we go. Right, ladies and gentlemen, hello, welcome to YouTube. As you can see, we are doing something different this week. We are not just doing a play and explain. We're not streaming. We are going to run a quote unquote podcast / conversation with a fellow mid-stakes grinder, Mr. Gary Chappell. Hello, sir. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thanks, mate. Happy to be here. Hopefully, I can offer some value to viewers.
Fingers crossed. I mean, you know, that's why I brought you here at the end of the day, mate. So for those of you unaware, Gary is a Run It Once coach like myself, long time Run It Once coach. You also do coaching for Mr. Free Nachos and his CFP, as I understand. Also streams, and also has very recently done a 1 million hand 200NL Russian cash challenge. I have got that right, haven't I?
Yeah. So I joined the CFP about 18 months ago, and just as part of that, I did 1 million hands on GG Russian cash just to try and see if the games were beatable, and just something to keep me accountable and motivated. And yeah, I've just started, basically completed that, and then after that I've started streaming and basically running the challenge again, just because I think it's quite a cool thing to do. Like, those games are good for streaming, and it's something for everyone to follow along with and hopefully support me.
Yeah, and as it turns out, the games are beatable, which I definitely doubted. But and then I saw your graph, and then I was like, oh shit, maybe they are actually beatable. It's as I say, I'll link Gary's all his socials and stuff like that below if you follow him on obviously YouTube or Instagram or whatever. He's posted the 1 million or the last challenge in that graph, and it is seriously impressive. I cannot understate that. So yeah, go check that out. And yeah, 200NL Russian cash, you can beat the rake. Who knew? So the purpose of this sort of YouTube video is for us to talk about how to escape the kind of low stakes trap, which is something we've both done throughout our career. We've gone obviously through the stakes. Myself, just a small deposit of $100 playing 10NL through COVID, and then worked my way up. Gary obviously done very similar, going through low stakes through to high stakes. And with regards to me and my boot camp that I'm running and so on, obviously that's very much targeted at people who play low stakes. So I kind of wanted to have a little bit of a conversation with someone who's also, as I say, a mid-stakes grinder and who's gone through that, to kind of talk about how to do it and to give you guys some free content that hopefully is going to be, as I say, pretty beneficial throughout the next 45 minutes to an hour or so. So we'll jump in. First of all, mate, in terms of like yourself, well, give us a bit of your story, obviously, for the people that are kind of unaware. Like, how long did it take you to go from like low stakes to mid stakes and so on? When did you start playing and all this sort of stuff?
So I started when I was 18, kind of casually, I guess, through uni, and took it seriously after uni. So been playing professionally, if you want to call it that, for about 15 years. Around the time of the poker boom, so yeah, pretty fortunate timing wise, and yeah, just grinded through the stakes over the years. Did play some MTTs along the way, getting staked to play to build a role, but mainly cash games, really online, a bit of live stuff, and yeah, got through to some high stakes, played some high stakes, but then a few years ago just made the decision to settle for playing mid stakes and just grinding out volume. I think everyone's kind of a bit different and needs to find their place in the poker ecosystem. And for me, the higher stakes, the money just became a bit too important. Certain stage of my life, married, house, kid, those types of things, meant that I just decided just to grind. I mean, I just love playing the Zoom games, the Russian cash games. So that's kind of where I fitted into the poker world, I guess. Everyone's different. That's just where it is for me.
Yeah, I think it's definitely addictive playing Zoom or Russian cash. I always found that like it's really easy to just sit in and play, and also sit out, which is quite important. Like for me, who plays reg tables, it's a bit of a nightmare to start a session and pause a session and so on. It's definitely, for in terms of like just easy access, something that's really straightforward and easy to do, especially, as I say, when you've got, as a lot of us have, and when we get older, obviously family commitments, you know, house, wife, kid, and so on. Your priorities change, don't they, as you get older? I definitely find that once I'm
Yeah,
in my 30s now.
I find sorry, just to add a little something. I think on that topic, like some people just can make reasonable poker decisions quickly, I think, and that's where I
Mm.
kind of fit in. Whereas some people who are really strong at knowing the game tree and the theory and stuff like that, they are better served playing less tables, focusing on quality because they can outplay their opponents massively.
Mm.
So I don't think there's like just this linear trajectory that all poker players have to take. I think there's lots of different opportunities and ways of making a good living out of it. And it's up to each person to find out where that is for them.
Yeah, find your lane, isn't it?
Mm.
Because I definitely I've experienced this myself with Zoom, especially. Like I've played a lot of Zoom during my career, and I'm kind of what you just said. Like if I have to make a decision quickly, I'm going to make a mistake very often. And I did even at the start of this year. It was Stars did their rate back changes, and I was like, amazing! It's going to be like Supernova Elite again. I'm going to go and play all the volume, 4 table Zoom, 4 tables of reg tables, and just rattle out the volume. And then the damn swing came very quickly, and you realise you're just punting it off. Me especially, when I've just got no time to make a decision. Whereas if I play 4 reg tables and 4 reg tables only, and I've got all the time in the world, I can slow things down and I can kick in that sort of rational part of my brain a little bit more, and it just works way better for me. I could never be, well, I figured this out, a rake back grinder, or someone who plays high volume. I don't think that's me. And as I say, it is, isn't it? Finding your lane, figuring out what kind of person you are, where your strengths lie, and then playing to those strengths a little bit more, rather than just doing what everyone else says you need to do in a lot of ways.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. That's the problem I think nowadays. There's just quite a lot of things out there now. People essentially got their own courses to sell something and telling you what to do, but while a lot of that is good information and it's a good guideline, you do need to figure it out yourself, where you fit in and what's best for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think then in terms of like moving, say you were to play 50NL tomorrow, you're a 50NL grinder or a 100NL grinder, or when you do your coaching and things like that, what do you think is like if you had to pick one factor or one thing that holds people back from going from say 50 and 100 to 200, 500 and beyond, what do you think that is?
Probably overcomplicating everything.
Okay, yeah.
And getting in a mess. So I think, and I'm sure this will lead on to other topics like you want to discuss, but I think nowadays there's just so much information out there for everyone, whether it's social media, YouTube videos, CFPs, courses, run at once. There's just so much information, and I think there's too much for people trying to progress through low stakes to digest, and I think it's fair to say a lot of them will make the mistake of trying to watch everything and take a bit from everything, and that will then inevitably make them try and implement all of these complex strategies with, they see Linus Love over betting the flop or something else. They're just mix matching all of these different strategies.
Yeah.
And essentially just messing up and getting it wrong.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a big one for me. I think a big one personally was the emotional side of it.
Okay.
Was huge.
How do you mean?
I think. So I see it every day when I play. Like, there's these players who are really solid poker players, but then all of a sudden they'll just make this random punt.
Yeah, probably me that.
What are they doing? That can only come down to emotion.
Yeah.
Whether it's tilt, whether it's, I don't know, being distracted and just clicking the wrong button, whatever it is. So it can only come with experience and playing hands. Like when you're uncertain about what the best play is, you then question everything you're doing. So I think once you get into a position where you played a lot of hands, you know your strategy, You know what you're doing. It's just about repetition and implementing it time and time again, and seeing the long-term vision of poker,
Yeah.
as opposed to being too results orientated in a small time frame. You know, you lose a flip with ace king against queens, or you get stacked with aces, and you just, you know, naturally we are greedy as humans. We have entitlement tilt, and we just we lose it. And it happened to me a lot when I was younger, like starting out. But as you become more experienced, you just realise that these things are just happen as variants, and you just got to, you know, stay level-headed when you're playing.
Yeah.
So that's another thing I'd say human emotion. Once you get over that, whether that's, you know, that's why there's all these mindset coaches now. I mean, they're obviously worth their value. But yeah, in terms of actual poker skills, I think it's just overcomplicating it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think a lot of the, you know, one-to-one coaching I do, you get kind of the same questions, or I'll do like a review of someone's live play, which is always something I tend to do quite early in like a coaching journey to kind of understand how people think. And a lot of the time I'll see, you know, a student and he opens middle position, big blind calls, and the flop comes down the ace queen 3 two-tone, right? And then, you know, big blind checks, and our hero in this situation checks back, and I'm like, okay, right, we check back, what's your strategy there? And they go, well, the highest EV strategy here is to play overbet or check. And I go, fantastic, okay, so where does your hand go? And they go, well, you know, could do this, could do that. And then I go, okay, you can play overbet or check here, it might be the highest EV strategy. But then we go into the solver and I show them what that actually looks like. And on ace queen 3, you know, two-tone or whatever, they see then that we start betting hands like 9s and 10s on the flop with a spade or whatever it is, you know, and start overbetting. And they're like, oh yeah, I wouldn't start doing that. Or that you start, you know, queen 10 offsuit or something like that starts overbetting the flop. And already, because it's so counterintuitive, you're just like, right, okay, how well are you actually going to play that strategy? Like, how well are you going to execute that? And then everyone sort of goes, yeah, I'm not sure. But I've heard, you know, Patrick Leonard say that, you know, you need to put people into uncomfortable spots and do things that they're not expecting and all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, yes, you can, but also why do you need to do that so early? And also, how well are you actually going to execute it? It's not just about forcing your opponent to make a mistake. Like, are you going to make mistakes? And how easily is that going to happen? And I'm always one of those people who's just like, you've opened middle position, it's ace queen 3, just bet your range, and you can't make a mistake doing that. It's a very, very good strategy to do. It's a simple one. You can't make a mistake on the flop at least, and then you kind of progress from there. But because it's more fashionable, isn't it, to play, oh well, I can put my opponent into a really tough spot and make him make this big mistake on the flop, and it's like, why though? We don't need to do it just yet, you know.
No, and well, I think when you look at the EV differences between the flop sizes, they're never that huge.
Yeah.
And then, say you capture all of that EV on the flop by using the correct size. Do you then know how you're going to play turn and river? And if you don't, you're playing turn and river in a bigger pot. Whereas if you use a small range bet on the flop, okay, it might not be the highest EV, but then you're going to capture more EV on turn and river because you're more familiar with how those nodes play, and you know how your opponent's range looks, and those types of things. So yeah, I agree. I think for all players who are kind of starting out, you want to start simple. Like, you don't want to dive in with 3 different flop sizes. You want to start simple, and then as you progress, you know, and you improve and you come up against stronger players, then you can start adding a bit of complexity, whether that's flop or turn or river, whatever, or pre-flop, whatever it is. But yeah, I think like a lot of CFPs, as far as I know, NBA ones anyway, kind of start that way as well.
Yeah.
Start with a flop range bet, and it's proven to, you know, be working well. Everyone is still overfolding. So.
Yeah. This is it. Still, even I was looking at some of the data from like my games and stuff the other day actually, and it's just like, oh yeah, people are still actually overfolding to a small C bet on the flop by like 5%, and I was like, oh. Even in this day and age, it's still happening, which, you know, it's kind of crazy. But yeah, it's one of them, isn't it? With especially earlier on in your, you know, poker development and your poker career, for example, like building the reps, I think is just something that's actually very, very underrated. I mean, again, it's very again common question I always get is, okay, well, how much should I study, versus playing time? How much of my time should I dedicate in GTO Wizard or Pyre or whatever it is versus how much should I be playing? And I think if you play 50NL, for me anyway, play. Just go and play. What do you think on that? Like, what would your approach be if you were, say, a 50NL grinder tomorrow?
I'm an advocate for volume. Like, it's just, I'm a bit biased because that's why I love playing. I hate studying.
Yeah.
But I do think there's so much to be said for putting more time into playing and just being in these spots against humans, because you can spend as much time you want as a solver and you're going to learn a decent amount, but essentially you're not playing against a human, and humans don't play like solvers. So actually, when you've played millions of hands like you and me have, over a decade, then you see these spots time and time again, and you just know, regardless of what the solver says, you know what humans are doing. So you get to, like, you build up your hand reading skills. Actually, really important skills to playing against humans and not playing against a solver. So I'm a big advocate for definitely putting in the volume. There is obviously a balance, but yeah, I think people aren't studying efficiently anyway. Even if they are using solvers, they're wasting their time looking at stuff that doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I mean, 100% agree with you on that. Where do you think are like some common rabbit holes that people go down with solvers?
Not really sure where they would go wrong. I just know that they're probably not. People aren't really looking at, like, using it effectively. I guess is the right word to describe it. Because they're gonna essentially put in two ranges, input sizes, board texture, and then they're gonna look at the equilibrium output, and then just go, okay, that's what I'm gonna play. I need to mix all of these different hands into different sizes.
Yeah.
And try and just learn that and implement that.
Yeah.
Whereas, I lost my train of thought, but ultimately, anyone who has node locked or used solvers efficiently know that you just take these general principles. Before I come to node lock, you take these general principles from solvers that you then can apply to multiple spots in a game tree, as opposed to just learning one individual output. On Ace King 3, I know that this is the strategy. Okay, what's solver doing here? What type of hands is it doing? So, as an example, solver loves bluffing like small pocket pairs in a variety of spots. So there's these types of principles you can just apply to multiple spots in a game tree then, as opposed to trying to, because it's impossible to learn it all.
Yeah.
So that's one way you could learn effectively, like find the reasoning behind what it's doing, not actually churn out what it is doing.
Yeah.
And then node locking as well. Like, anyone who's node locked knows that it only takes a tiny, and this comes on to like the GTO v exploitative argument, which I just think is nonsense. But all you need to do is shift one of the strategies slightly, and then the solver, all of those indifferent hands the solver had at equilibrium, just goes one way or the other. They either call everything, fold everything, bluff everything.
Yeah.
So people are using solvers and they're learning this equilibrium strategy, but then they're going and playing against humans who are not even close to that.
Yeah.
So these people who say, I mean, I'll go on to it. These people who say that they're a theory player. Well, what does that really mean? Because if you're a theory player and use a solver, you'll see that the solver by nature plays exploitative poker. By node locking it and putting in a human's tendency to overfold, for example, the solver will then bluff everything.
Yeah.
So I think they're not mutually exclusive. They're just, in my opinion, they're combined into just playing good poker. And I think when people talk about they're a theory player or a GTO player, I'm talking mainly about low stakes players and mid stakes players. They're essentially just playing some random strategy that they believe to be somewhat balanced, where they're folding some hands, they're calling some hands, they're bluffing some hands. they're giving up some hands, but ultimately, because of the human nature of being risk averse, they're just not even close to playing like a solver. They're going to be overfolding, under bluffing in huge amount of spots. Guessing, human emotion comes into it.
Yeah.
So there's just like these people who think they're playing close to theory. Even like high stakes guys aren't playing right frequencies. It's just it's almost impossible.
Yeah.
So I think people shouldn't look at it as you're a theory player or you're an exploit player. You should look at it as take overriding theory principles as your kind of foundation, and then use that intuitively. And this comes again back to the experience of playing hands and handstands. Use that intuitively against humans in game based on the player type you're up against or overall pool to adjust your strategy. And that would kind of be my advice.
Yeah, I think
so there is a bit of a not knock on, but a follow on from that. In that, resilience is a thing, which is quite big in CFPs, like MDA CFPs, because how hard you want to go down the exploit train. And I think this is mainly where the theory v exploit argument is. Like, do you want to play hard exploit in every single spot? But by resilience, I mean you want to exploit people, but be undetected.
Yeah.
So if you're playing in anonymous pools, you can do what you like.
Of course. Yeah.
If you're playing in known pools, particularly of HUDs, you probably need to be a little bit careful. And coming up with like an exploit resilient strategy is basically just exploiting people, but just so you kind of chip away slowly, making sure you beat them. And the advantage of doing that as well is naturally you're going to probably be more aggressive by doing that. And that's just going to get you closer to what the solver is going to do, because the solver is a lot more aggressive than humans are. So actually, if by exploiting people, you can't really be exploited back, because all you're doing is playing a more aggressive strategy, which is going to be more in line with the solver.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I've rambled on for a while. Whenever I hear the argument, I'm just kind of like, well, I understand what people kind of mean, but essentially people who think they're playing theory are just guessing. Because if you're playing theory, you essentially should be exploiting the opponent in the spot you're up against.
Yeah, there's so many good points that you just made. Yeah, so many. I think in terms of the theory side of things, I think the issue with solvers, or one of the biggest issues I see, is people feel like and I think the Wacko talks about this a lot in his video, shout out to him. It forces you to have this have to mindset. I have to do this because the solver does this. I have to do this, I have to do this. And then it kind of really blinkers you a little bit, because my biggest bit of advice with using a solver is the same as what you said, in terms of trying to understand what changes when something changes. If I make my opponent overfold the river in this certain spot, what happens to all of my range? My size increases, or I bluff every bluff, and so on. What happens if I take away this guy's option to check raise, on the flop, and he can never check raise me? All of a sudden all my value hands start to go bigger, and we actually just size by our hand a little bit more. Right, okay, so if I'm playing a passive fish, that might be what I want to do. All of these things where you're kind of just understanding, if you can figure out what causes the solver to change from that equilibrium, then you're starting to think. And the issue that most people have with solvers is that I think they try to mimic rather than think a little bit, and it's just kind of, I've seen this output, and then you're trying to, I spoke to a lot of people who are just like, okay, this is the board, what do you think with this hand? And you can see them trying to remember the output. I think this will mix, I think this will do a bit of both, I've rolled high on the RNG, so I'm going to check. And it's kind of just like, well, a mix just means it makes the same amount of money if you check or if you bet. That's all that means. So then what information do you have based on the hand that's played out that might shift you one way or the other? And if you don't have any information, then sure, mix it up. But I think, as I say, studying using solvers is the biggest mistake I always see, is it just causes people to stop thinking in a lot of ways and stop searching for the line that's going to make you the most money. It's the best question you could ever ask yourself for me. Is like, okay, well, what makes the most money? If you just act yourself out in every sport, you're going to be pretty sweet. You're going to be doing pretty well, all in all, I think.
Yeah, I 100% agree. 100% agree. And like I watched one of shout out to Carrot Corner on his videos, and he said just like throw away your RNG, because like in every spot there is a right decision. Either your hand is going to be better as a call or a fold. So people are too robotic these days, and the idea of playing poker and engaging a poker brain is kind of gone, and there's just not enough adapting. Like I had someone the other day ask me like a strategy for cash drop pots on GG. And it's like, well, I mean, you can't learn a strategy because every single one is different. You're gonna because of the way the games are played. If you look at GTA Wizard, everyone has 100 big blinds, and you learn the strategy. It just never happens. Everyone's got different stack sizes.
Yeah.
There's a different amount in the middle. You're in a different position. There's different player types. It is just a lot of feeling it out and engaging your brain and playing poker, and not just trying to be given this foolproof system and like it just working. And I think that is a big problem for low stakes, but this is aimed at low stakes players. I think that's kind of a big problem. And what you said about the solver, it's so true. And like it does only take a tiny shift in one strategy, and then the counter strategy is just crazy. And I think probably low stakes guys probably aren't aware of that. And in Nachos, they did some pre-flop data, and they plugged in like the general pool tendencies of the Russian cash pools, and it basically meant that on the button you could open like 80-90% of hands. But like it comes back to resilience, and you need to be careful. And I think particularly for low stakes guys, they're better off learning, like finding a kind of a middle ground where they're essentially being more aggressive in a lot of spots, but ultimately you don't want to necessarily build a strategy that's going to max exploit your pool if your ambitions are moving up. I think you're better off learning a strategy that's going to work well at higher stakes, because ultimately it's still going to work well at lower stakes, and then just making intuitive deviations in that pool. Because you learn, say you start opening 90% of hands at 50 NL, and then you come and play at 500, and people are just going to push back at you.
They'll con on quite quick, won't they? That's it.
If someone sees you opening queen deuce off, they're going to do something about it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think there's just a lot of I mean, I've got nothing else to add really without rambling on. So I think that's all I've got to say on it.
Yeah, I think. Have you ever seen the film The Imitation Game with Benedict Cumberbatch?
No, I haven't.
Right, so for those of you watching, great film, go watch it. About in World War II with the Brits and the Germans. The Germans had this code machine called the Enigma machine, which basically they used to codify all of their messages that they were sending via radio to each other. And anyway, we sunk a submarine or something like that. We managed to get hold of one of these Enigma machines, and then it was up to Benedict. He played Alan Turing, is the guy, that's it, who did it. We tried to break down the code of this machine so we could figure out what the Germans were saying to each other, and he managed to do it. But how this links into the poker is essentially and exploiting is that we then had their code. We knew what they were saying to each other. We knew where they were going to attack us. We knew what attacks were going to come on what day, where they were happening, and so on. So we could stop every single attack if we wanted to. But in the film, it's really interesting. They basically had to play God, because they were like, we can't stop every attack, because then they'll know that we've got the code, and then they'll change it. So we need to pick and choose which attacks we stop and let some through to stay in the shadows so they don't change up and change their code, which is really like exactly the same as, well, not exactly the same, but a similar sort of thing as max exploit versus like soft exploit, if you will. And I think, the issue with going max exploit, which is something, if you node lock the solver will always just go, well, he's overfolding, so I'm just going to exploit 100%. The issue is that people can figure you out. And whilst this won't happen that much at low stakes, once you get higher, as you say, if you're just opening queen 2 off from the button, I'm going to see that when you go to showdown, and then immediately I'm going to start, I know what to do versus that. I'm just going, well, good luck to you. You're going to get 3-bet, endless amounts of times. So then, as you say, find the happy medium, open wider, but maybe just start with all of the, 0 EV mixed opens. Open 8-7 off pure, or open Jack 3 suited pure, or 10-8 off pure, or something like that, and then change your button opening range from say 43% or whatever it is to like 50, and then people are not going to adjust versus that, and you show down 10-8 off, and everyone just goes, it's 10-8 off, and you move on. But if I showed down, as I say, 7-3 off suit that I've opened the button with, people are going to sit up and take notice of that, and then try and adjust. And then you get into this horrible world of leveling wars, and you have to keep track of every leveling war you're in with a population of, Russian cash, 300 entries or whatever, on any given time or day, or probably more, to be honest. So like staying within the shadows a little bit is something I would definitely recommend in terms of exploiting, at least in spots that happen very often. I think it was, I read somewhere, Mate Boyfin. I can't remember his name, his actual real name. Marcus, isn't it? Marcus Likkonen. Obviously, nosebleed guy, one of the best players, online guys of all time. He was basically saying with exploiting, it's that the spots that don't happen very often are the ones that you can just go max exploit. So, if you're in a 4-bet pot on the river in a spot, he just says, well, there's no need to kind of, think about future game there, because even if you go max exploit in that kind of spot, I'm very much paraphrasing here, but like if you go max exploit in some kind of spot where no one can re-exploit you because the spot never happens again, then you have free reign to go and do it. But like your button opening range, that's going to happen in 3 hands later or whatever, that you probably can't. But as I say, on those river spots where you're never going to get into the spot ever again, you can kind of just go 0 to 100 really quick, which I thought was a good bit of advice. If the spot's never going to happen again, you can do what you want.
I think in low stakes games you can get away with more because the pool's so much bigger.
True. So, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a great
players aren't going to be playing enough hands against you unless they see something that's just completely ridiculous. But the problem is there's going to be too much like confirmation bias and stuff like that involved. So you can get away with more in a huge pool. But my advice for guys in the low stakes trying to progress is just don't get too crazy, and I would just start using all the indifferent hands.
Yeah.
So when you look at like everyone now who plays poker semi-seriously has seen pre-flop charts, for example.
Yeah.
You'll see that you're mixing a lot of hands, opening, 3-betting, 4-betting, whatever. I would just start by using those mixed hands as your kind of exploit hands, one way or the other. Because they're mixed hands, they're 0 EV hands. So those 0 EV hands either become plus EV or minus EV, depending on the situation, who you're playing against. So, opening ace-10 off under the gun is indifferent, 0 EV. If you're playing in a table where you're likely to go 3 or 4-way, stuff like that, then it becomes minus EV. So you can probably start folding that. Just when you're 3-betting, if you're playing against a player who's opening tight, then 3-betting some of the marginal stuff you probably don't want to do. So I would just use that, and then that's going to mean that you're not doing anything that's just completely out of line. You're not doing anything that's going to be able to counter exploit you, because firstly, people don't know how often you're 3-betting king jack off button against cutoff, whether you're doing it every time, half the time, or what. So that's a hand that's going to be mixed, so you can just do it every time in a certain pool if people aren't 4-betting enough, and just my advice would be do that with those hands, and don't start getting crazy and 3-betting 9-6 suited button against cutoff and going too wide, because you are then going to be getting into bad habits, I think, when you do start progressing up the stakes. So I would just that's what I would advise people to do.
Yeah, the issue is as well, you have the rest of the hand to play. That's also it's one thing I talk about a lot with, like, when I do coaching, is the dangers of exploiting early. So like again, like if I exploit in the river, fantastic, because I don't have another street to play, so I can get away with a little bit more. If I want to exploit pre-flop, and then as you say, this guy's fold to 3-bet is 75%, therefore I want to 3-bet 9-6 of clubs or whatever. The issue is you then have to play the rest of the hand with a hand that should never be in there, and you don't know where it goes, you don't know how things interact, and you end up, it's again quite easy to get lost, especially when you're still relatively new to the game in terms of your poker journey. You don't have that kind of intuition that you've already developed that would allow you to kind of work it out on the fly. And as I say, you might, and this is I think a common pitfall a lot of people fall down with, is you go for the exploit early on, which might gain you a little bit of EV here and there, but then you end up costing yourself a stack with a hand that should never be in there, because you've radically misplayed it later on because you didn't really know where it was going. You didn't adjust to your opponent's, tendencies and so on. Like, as I say, if he's overfolded to your 3-bet, by infinite, when he calls, his range is actually then pretty strong. So then you should slow down a little bit and probably not put any more money in. But then everyone else is like, well, this guy will overfold the flop, because everyone overfolds the flop to c-bet. So I'm going to c-bet my range here and he's going to overfold. But if he's overfolded pre-flop, in this 3-bet pot scenario, then his range is already stronger. So then he might not actually be overfolding the flop because he's only got good hands. So, there's all of these kind of pitfalls that you can get into if you just go a little bit too max too early, which is why I think, as you say, just kind of stay within the margin for error, at least early on in the hand. And then gradually as you progress through, you can get a little bit more sort of exploitative as you go. That's definitely the way I tend to do it, in a lot of spots at least.
I think familiarity is key. Like, just keep putting yourself in familiar spots. Learning the game, and particularly, like, I think a lot of low stakes players, they progress through the game by playing like Zoom games, Russian cash games. Like things move quickly, so you don't want to be wasting unnecessary mental energy. If you want to be playing a good few hours a day, it does get draining. So just familiar spots, easy decisions, time and time again. Learn it, repeat it, go. Would be my advice. And then as you progress up the limits, people then do move to reg tables, particularly when you get to high stakes. There's no Zoom or Russian cash going. That's when you got more time to make decisions, and you can focus a little bit more on quality. But I think to start with, the guys at the low stakes, familiar spots, simple strategy, churn up the volume with a strategy that's winning, and just progress through as quick as possible. I would also say on the exploit, if going too far, like if you go too far, you're making a lot of assumptions about your opponent that might not be accurate.
Yes.
They might be based on you seeing a couple of showdowns, or based on HUD stats over 1,000 hands. Like, these things are not enough, really. Particularly in low stakes pools that are huge. Like, you probably don't have a big enough HUD sample if you're playing in HUD games. On that opponent to make these assumptions, particularly if you're kind of new to the game and you don't know how exploiting works to a certain degree, if you don't know how no locking affects things. And this, to be honest, this I think can only come when you have the data. And that only comes if you either get the data yourself or you are part of a MDA base.
Right, we're back. Apologies to everyone. I'm going to edit this maybe, but I ran out of disk space and I've just had to clear some up, and I stopped Gary in full flow. And I can't remember what he was talking about now, but we'll... Can you? Or
I don't know how far we got, but I think I was somewhere talking about guys kind of making too many assumptions when they're exploiting.
Yes, thank you.
And based on... sorry if this has already been said, but...
we'll work it out.
Yeah, they're basing their exploits on, a few showdowns, maybe HUD stats based on, a few hundred hands. It's just not enough data. And then as soon as they start making those assumptions and they're wrong, then they're just exploiting themselves, and there's just a huge, it just gets messy then. And the only way to do it, to know how to exploit properly, really, is when you know the data. This is where kind of MDA-based CFPs have their place, because you can just take that data, put it into a solver, gives you an output against a population or certain player types that you're up against, and you can just label those player types, and then you kind of know what strategy you're playing. Whether you go hard exploit, whether you go kind of downplay a little bit resilient, like we talked about. It kind of depends what games you're playing in, I guess, and what style you want to play.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of my take on it. And also, when you do have the data, it does help the mental side of poker hugely, because you lose a hand, you kind of take consolation knowing that it works in the long run. Whereas it happened a lot to me when I was coming up through the low stakes games at the start of my poker life. Like, you make a play, you lose a hand, and I would just spend hours staring at it on the side screen, thinking, "Well, was I right? Was I wrong?" Or thinking about it in the evening when I'm, having dinner with friends or the missus or whatever. It's just, but now you can take that data, that constellation of data, knowing that, okay, I didn't work this time, but it's going to work in the long run. Close the door on poker at the end of the day and go and enjoy your evening. I think it just helps that side of it quite a lot.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it helps deal with the uncertainty. I think poker is a game of uncertainty and incomplete information at the end of the day, and you can never truly. It's very difficult to truly know the answer, and we're quite binary beings in a lot of ways. Like like we tend to deal in the black and white as much as we possibly can. Was I right? And this is the thing I think a lot of people, when they reviewed a hand in the solver, all they're really looking for is to see if they were right or not. And there's oftentimes not, the best way of looking at it. Sometimes there is no right or wrong. You're in this kind of really grey area, and sometimes it's impossible to know whether you were right or wrong. So kind of letting go a little bit. And as you just discussed about, the data, that gives you a little bit of comfort, because you can let go then, because you go, oh, well, from, the data I've seen, the data doesn't lie. That's going to tell me that this is probably going to be profitable in the long run. And then you just go, okay, great, next hand. And that's a very, very powerful mindset, I think, to have, to be able to let go, accept the result of the hand a little bit more, and then just go, actually, yeah, what I did there was probably okay in the long run. And then you don't beat yourself up about it. As I say, you're not, sat at home with the missus still thinking about the hand while she's telling you about her day, or anything like that. You let go a little bit more. It's a much more sort of healthy mindset to have. It's also interesting. You mentioned CFPs. I kind of wanted to talk about that. Like, obviously, you do coaching for Nacho's and his CFP, which is obviously very, very successful. What's your kind of opinion on, like, as I say, especially for people who are starting to progress and are going, like, and maybe playing 100 and L and things like that, they get a little bit stuck. What factors do you think you should be considering in terms of, like, when you weigh up, say, okay, should I join a CFP? Should I go get private coaching? Should I buy this course? What advice would you give people in terms of weighing that up?
Simplify. We said at the start, didn't we? There's just so much information out there now. So many different avenues you can take, and there is a danger just for people to try and absorb too much, and then just take on too much and get brain fog, and it just there's just not any clarity in them what they're doing and how they want to approach the game, what strategy they're going to build, because they've watched certain players range bet every flop, they watch certain players overbet. Some players are ultra aggressive, some players are a bit more balanced and whatever. So I think what I would advise is find people you can relate to, that have a similar philosophy, mindset, think about the game in a similar way that you do. And then find a few of those guys, whether it's coaches, streamers, YouTube content, whatever it is, and stick to that, because that's going to get you a long way in the game. And nowadays, I would personally advise, if you're like right at the low stakes, starting out, start with all the free content. Don't start paying, because nowadays there's so many good mid stakes, high stakes poker players producing content, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's on Twitch streaming. Whatever it is, and there's so much you can get that's free. So I would start there. They're not giving away everything, because a lot of stuff does have to stay behind paywalls. That's just the way the game is and game should be.
Yeah.
But start there, because that's going to get you like reasonably far through the low stakes at least. Some of it is really good, to be honest. So find guys that you like, that are good, that have a track record, aren't just trying to, you know, show you nonsense. Most of the guys I think that are the popular ones on YouTube, to be honest, they're all really, really good. The content's great. They're entertaining as well as informative. And they're reputable poker players. They're some of the best mid-stakes, high-stakes players around. So I would start there. And then as you progress, then decide whether you want to go down the route of training content, whether it's run at once, CFP, if you want that support network a bit more around you because you're not really sure how to do it on your own. Or a course. I'm not going to talk much about courses, so I haven't watched all of them. I mean, some of them are probably money grabs, some of them are going to be really good. There's probably going to be a whole spectrum of it. But I would suggest, ask people around that you kind of know in the poker circle, see what they've watched, see what they think's valuable, and then decide whether it's a training course, if it's a course, which one's for you. If it's a CFP, speak to the owners, find out what they do, maybe get some drafts of what they do, find out which one's for you, or however you want to go about it. But don't try and do everything all at once. Have a clear path. You're not going to get to high stakes tomorrow. It has to be a process. So start simple, find a couple of guys you like, and then as you progress, find out where you want to fit in, what type of route you want to take.
Yeah, I think it's great.
I don't know if you've got anything any different ideas to that. I mean, I know you're selling a course at the moment, which I mean, I said to you the other day.
Sign up below.
Yeah, I said to you the other day, didn't I? I think it's unbelievable value for money. I would advise people to. I'm not just saying that because I'm on it. I saw the price and I thought, how's that worth your time?
Yeah, you're not the only one to have said it. Definitely not. No. No, I think you make a really good point. I think what I would add to it is kind of, it's one of, again, I'm going to plug this, but it's one of the things I'll be talking about in the course, is kind of finding your game plan and philosophy, which I don't see it kind of being talked about an awful lot, but like each person, like you have your strengths, right? In terms of being a poker player, I have my strengths, and everyone is naturally kind of, well, maybe not naturally, but that's a whole different debate, but predisposed a little bit to having certain areas that are going to be strong in their poker game. Some people are naturally very aggressive, right? And again, I've had a lot of people who I've coached, who come to me and they've already got like a really nice red line, right? And then those people, obviously you don't have to teach them how to be aggressive because they're already that way inclined. But in terms of, say, someone who is naturally aggressive and already has that kind of red line, you naturally have this way of playing the game, and therefore you should look for people who also think in the same sort of way to learn from and improve from, because that's the style of poker player that you already are. Likewise, a lot of people, as I say, have the red lines that go like this and the blue lines that go like this. So then, I wouldn't really turn around to them and say, right, okay, you need to be, Stefan tomorrow. Go watch some Stefan videos and learn from him. Because the guy, or those kind of guys, they think about the game completely differently to how you do. And you will never be able to, or with great difficulty at least, you will not be able to kind of enter their heads and think about, things in the way they do, because they're just less risk averse than you are. You naturally might be a risk averse person. You might be like a hero folder rather than a hero caller, for example, and things like that. So if you find someone who's kind of aligned with, the way that you think about the game, or a couple of people that are, then as you say, you go and just follow them and take their approach. And it can't be, keep dropping my pen, it can't be understated how much like having a game plan is, how important that is, and understanding what that game plan is and having a philosophy, how important that is to improving, rather than just, as you say, taking a little bit from everyone and then just having this really sort of weird mishmash of many different strategies, and nothing is concise. Everything's all over the place. You do a little bit of everything, and you have no idea what kind of game you have, what kind of game plan you have.
That's pretty much how everyone is playing at low stakes and even mid stakes. To be honest,
Yeah.
everyone's guessing.
Yes, exactly, exactly, and you can make it easier on yourself. You can guess less by just going, okay, well, this is my game plan, right? So I'm just going to study how to play this kind of game plan, or I like how this particular YouTuber plays. I'm going to try and play in a similar style to how they do. I like the way they think. I align with maybe even just I align with the kind of person they are. I can relate to them in that kind of way. As I say, me trying to sit here, like I did some stuff earlier on in the year with Charlie Carroll and his Discord community, and I had him on a couple of calls, and you listen to how I would analyze a hand and how he would analyze a hand, and he was just thinking about stuff in just like a completely different way to what I was, and I was there making some really good points. Oh, you've thought about this, have you thought about this? But then I was also there I could never be him. I'm not that creative. I can't think in the way that he does about it. I have to just kind of go, that's great for you, but this is how I will approach things, and this is the way I tend to think about it. And the beauty of this game is you can be a Stefan, who just wants to redline his way into oblivion and victory, or you can be someone who's a little bit more measured, like I don't know, Muniz Star is always the one, that everyone talks about as the king of the nits, but that guy's a high stakes crusher as well. There's no right way of doing it, you just have to find your own way of doing it, really.
Yeah, I agree. And it's why, people say, poker's dying and, solvers are ruining the game and things like that, but it's just people, nobody's, not even, I'm not going to speak too much about high stakes guys because obviously they're the best around and I don't watch them play. But I doubt they're even close to solver, and they probably don't want to be because they're playing some form of exploit strategy that's beating the other players in their game because they can delve into one certain opponent that they're up against. Heads up battles and things like that. They have to exploit the opponent, otherwise they're not going to win.
Exactly.
So low stake, people are nowhere close to solvers. Everyone, unless you have a set strategy which is based on data that you then put into a solver and then come up with a counter strategy. Everyone is guessing this. You might think you play a certain style, but in a certain spot, you're just going to choose a size based on your emotion at the time. You're going to call a hand because you've lost an all in the previous hand. There's just so much random stuff that's going on, so much guessing about who your opponent is. You might think you're a theory orientated player, but then in a certain spot, you'll think, oh, this player's a bit tight, so I'm going to fold this time. Well, that's an exploit straight away. You're not a theory player then because you've got a hand that would be a call. At least some of the times you'd roll an RNG. Everyone is just feeling it out, and that's what poker is, in my opinion. Poker is just a game of exploiting, of just trying to get the edge on your opponent. How to what ability you're able to do that, or how hard you go on that is just it's just so many variables involved in the game, and that's why the game's great. That's why I love it.
It's the best. It is the absolute best. Yeah, I think there was a point I was going to make and it is flown right out my head. Oh, that's really annoying. What was I going to say? Doesn't matter. It's gone. Either way, I think that's probably quite a nice place to sort of wrap it up, to be fair. We love the game. We will continue to love the game for many, many more years, I think. I think...
Continue.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, poker will not die. I think that's a good place. Poker's been dying since forever. I could go on, any poker article in the comments or whatever, and someone will say that poker's been dying ever since the year dot. Probably people were saying it in the golden years, the
solvers, I don't think are gonna kill the game anyway. I think it's gonna be more like AI, if anything's gonna kill it.
Yeah,
Bottom, things like that. Not actually people's ability to play perfect poker.
No. Yeah, we're all very limited as human beings. Yeah, it'll be the AI and the robots that might bring the end to it online at least. But then you just go play live, and live as online might go like this a little bit more. Live might go a little bit more like this. There's always going to be a way. If you are a poker player, to make money, you just
you just hope that the poker sites bring in the necessary anti-botting detection software or whatever it is they do. So you'd
Yeah.
hope that, they obviously don't want the games to die because, it's their business. So hopefully it's looked after to a decent level. I know there's obviously botting that goes on now on some sites, but yeah, it's hopefully it doesn't get too extreme whereby the game does get completely ruined.
No, yeah, exactly. I do think as well that the sites it tends to happen on are the sites that kind of have a little bit of a monopoly anyway with in terms of the player pool. Like an Ignition or something like that. Like they know the people who play on Ignition can't really play elsewhere a lot of the time. So I don't know. It's a question for people who are far more business and intelligent than me in that front. I always try to cut out all the noise in that regard. I'm just going to focus on what I can control. I know there's bots. I know there's super users every now and again, raid, all of these things, and we just have to plow on and trust in. As you say, the poker sites, they have, their own money in the game, if you will. Like they're not incentivized to kill it, so hopefully they won't. But we'll see. That's probably a question for a different video, I would imagine. Could talk about that for another hour, couldn't we?
Yeah.
Right, yeah, we'll wrap it up there, mate. Honestly, thank you very much for coming on. I think there was what we've done nearly an hour. So much good stuff that we've talked about there, and we could probably do another hour in our sleep, to be honest. So yeah,
pleasure.
as I say, thank you for coming on. For those of you, as I say, unaware of who Gary is, as I say, I'm linking his socials and stuff like that in the link below. Go give him a follow on all of those. Go watch his streams. If you're a Run It Once guy, go watch his videos. They're all extremely good as well. And yeah, we'll GG it there. See you all on the next. Have fun. Love you, miss you. See you in a bit.